The United Nations Special Envoy Hans Grimberg concludes his two-day visit to the interim capital Aden. The U.S. envoy Tim King urged Houthis to release the detained staff of the embassy in Sana'a immediately and with no further delay. A huge fire erupts in displaced camps in Al Khoukha district within Hodeidah and destroys more than 40 houses. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Irana Swela. Yemen's government has agreed to allow Houthi-issued passport holders to travel outside Yemen. 3 officials said that commercial flights will take off from the capital Sana'a under a truce deal. The first flight is expected to operate the next week under the UN-brokered deal. Special Envoy Hans Grimberg has concluded a 2-day visit to the interim capital Aden. He discussed with different Yemeni government officials ways to preserve the truce and possibility of extending it. The following report has more details.
Hans Grimberg, the UN ambassador to Yemen, arrived in Aden on Tuesday to help sustain the country's 2-month truce. He has recently concluded his 2-day visit, during which he met with Rashad Alimi, president of the Leadership Council, Yemeni Prime Minister Ma'in Abdul Malik, and Tariq Saleh, vice president of the Presidential Leadership Council. Mr. Grimberg reviewed the truce's status and the substantial advantages it has provided to Yemeni people thus far, including the considerable reduction in civilian fatalities. Discussions also looked into measures to overcome obstacles such as the opening of highways in Taiz and other governorates and resuming commercial flights from Sana'a's airports. He spoke with Rashad Al-Alimi, chairman of the Presidential Leadership Council, who emphasized the necessity of fulfilling all provisions of the truce, including the lifting of the blockade placed on Taiz by Iran-backed Houthi militants. Rashad Al-Alimi stressed that the government was willing to go to whatever length to support the success of UN peace efforts to terminate the Houthi coup. Concerning the resumption of flights at Sana'a International Airport, he reminded the envoy that the government had offered multiple suggestions, which the Houthis had greeted with obvious delay and resistance. He claims that the militias are using the matter for political gain, oblivious to the humanitarian considerations that led to its inclusion in the truce. According to official Yemeni sources, Grimberg will continue his efforts to sustain the humanitarian ceasefire and find a comprehensive political settlement. On the ground, the Yemeni military continued to count Houthi truce breaches. On Sunday, it reported 74 additional infractions on several battle fronts. The breaches were confirmed in Ma'rib, Hajjah, Hodeidah, Taiz, and Daleh. The violations included rocket fire and artillery shelling at military positions, the launch of armored drones, the deployment of snipers, the continued reinforcement of positions, and amassing of troops. In contrast, the army and resistance forces have stated their adherence to the ceasefire in accordance with military and political directions. Grimberg stated that to limit the impact of the conflict on civilians and promote the free movement of persons and commodities, the parties must work quickly to execute all parts of the truce concurrently. He also urged them to collaborate constructively and to demonstrate their commitment to all humanitarian aspects.
The United Nations announced that it will collect $38 billion to alleviate the Safer tanker disaster. The UN held a conference with the government of the Netherlands to collect donations to address the risk of oil spill. During the conference, the Secretary General of the UN expressed his appreciation to this initiative.
An oil spill would block access to the port where 2/3 of Yemen's food arrives. This would be disastrous for all the vulnerable people there. The alarm bells could not be ringing any louder. But luckily, there's a plan to fix this problem, provided we can raise enough money to offload the oil and tow the ship to a place where it can be recycled in an environmentally sound way. This is not just a regional problem, it is a global problem, and we can do something about it.
The United Nations and the Netherlands co-hosted a donor conference yesterday in Hague. The event aimed at mobilizing international efforts to secure funding to help prevent the disaster of Safer, the aging oil tanker, offshore of Hodeidah. The following report has more on this story.
In a seemingly last-ditch attempt to save the Red Sea from a foreseeable crisis, the United Nations co-hosted with the Netherlands a donor conference in The Hague to save Safer tanker. The salvage operation of the decaying tanker, which is full of oil and moored off the coast of Yemen, needs $140 $45 million. David Grisley, the United Nations humanitarian coordinator for Yemen, said the amount of the needed grants include $80 million to transfer more than 1 million barrels of crude oil from the ship. The Belgian conference comes more than 2 months after the United Nations and Houthi rebels reached an agreement to transfer the tanker's contents to another vessel. The agreement also includes a United Nations commitment to provide a replacement equivalent to sulfur suitable for export within 18 months. The Iranian-backed Houthis control Yemen's western Red Sea ports, including Ras Isa, just 6 kilometers from where the FSO Sulfur has been moored since the 1980s. The tanker is rusting with a cargo that at risk of exploding or spilling. Negotiations have so far failed to resolve how to secure the cargo and the ship, which has been left without maintenance for the past 7 years. In the event of an oil spill, the impacts would be devastating. Crude oil contains toxic chemicals that are harmful to human health. Millions of people in Yemen and in nearby countries could be exposed to very high air pollution levels from a possible explosion. An oil spill would exacerbate the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, preventing access to the main ports of Hodeida and Salif. The oil spill, if happened, could drift to the coastlines of Yemen's neighboring countries, potentially disrupting shipping routes, fishing, and tourism in the Red Sea resorts. The short and long-term potential humanitarian and environmental impacts of sulfur in the region would be mitigated only by the removal of oil from import.
The World Food Programme said that the food situation in Yemen is catastrophic. They estimated that Yemen needs about $2 billion annually in order to secure food. They also expected that food prices would rise by 30%, especially with the impacts of the Ukrainian crisis. The U.S. State Department held a meeting with Saudi Foreign Minister to discuss progress of Yemeni truce. The meeting took place in Morocco and it included the adherence to the 2-month truce. They also discussed bilateral relations, food security, Saudi Arabia's humanitarian aid, and economic support. The U.S. Special Envoy confirmed that the Houthi militia did not release employees of U.S. Embassy in Sana'a. He further stated that there is no excuse for arresting, detaining, and isolating innocents from their families. He also called on returning the individuals to the United States immediately. The government forces recorded 32 Houthi violations of the truce in the West Coast. It added that the Houthi militia continues the mobilization of forces and set up new sites and fortifications. A soldier was killed and Houthi drones were spotted in violation of the truce in Hodeida, and a Houthi drone was dropped in Ma'rib. A Houthi attack was repelled and a ballistic missile fell at Ma'rib Governorate. Government forces and tribes in Ma'rib managed to repel a Houthi attack on a military site in Al-Mukhaddara front. Field military sources indicated that battles broke out between the two sides and continued for more than 1 hour with various types of weapons. Despite the initiative made by the joint forces to open the main road between Hais and Al-Jarrahi, Houthi militia continues to block the other part of its side, making it hard for people and vehicles to move between the two districts. This forms another violation to the UN truce, which states clearly opening roads to ease movement of people and goods. This report has more details.
The local authority in Al-Hodeida inspected the linking port between Al-Jarrahi and Hais districts, days after the joint forces reopened it to civilians and trucks which are transporting commercial goods, based on what was agreed upon within the terms of the UN truce, while the Houthi militia still refuses to open this route from its side. As a result of the war, this road turned into a crossing outlet that separates the neighboring areas from each other. This road has also become a witness to separation between two districts, which used to act like one body before the conflict. Hais outlet to districts under the control of the Houthis was inspected by the local authority on Eid visit to remind the United Nations of one of the most important conditions of the humanitarian truce, which is the opening of this crossing to civilians.
Today, we've conducted a visit to the crossing road, which was reopened upon the agreement of the UN truce. It was prepared under the direct supervision of the vice chairman of the PLC. However, Houthi militia is still insisting on its closure. So we're sending our message to the UN to force the militia to commit to this condition in the truce, as the road will alleviate the suffering of civilians.
Until this day, the Houthis have refused to respond to the joint forces' step in opening the road between Hais and Al-Jarrahi in an attempt to deprive civilians of their rights, cutting off all ties of affiliation, making it difficult for ease of movement for vehicles and trucks, and carrying commercial goods to areas under the Houthi control.
We've reopened the road again based on the truce agreement. However, the Houthi militia is preventing vehicles and civilians from crossing.
This road has also witnessed interruptions and shootings for anyone who crosses it, and prevention from reaching Al-Jarrahi district. The road is still filled with mines planted by Houthis, who didn't respond to the humanitarian truce. Unparalleled criminal acts carried out by the Houthi militia, without any international action to condemn the continued violations of the Houthis, who have so far not shown any response or intention to spare civilians the scourge of war, and pave the road for establishing peace.
Coming next. People struggle to move between Taiz and Aden as the main road linking the two cities is in terrible condition. Welcome back. A massive fire destroys 40 houses in Al-Khoukha camps. The executive unit said the fire broke out in the family's tent in Al-Khoukha district before it spread to the rest of the camp. The unit has launched an appeal to urgently intervene in an attempt to relieve the afflicted with household and food items. As the conflict continues, suffering of displaced people across the country gets aggravated day by day. This suffering reached its climax with women and children. A recent UN report has confirmed that the majority of displaced people in Yemen are women and children. This report has more details.
A new report released by the United Nations Development Programme has said that an estimated 77% of the 4.3 million people displaced in Yemen are women and children. Ma'rib hosts over 60% of all Yemeni refugees and asylum seekers who escaped the hell of Houthi militias that turned the country to one of the world's largest humanitarian crises. The report also revealed that an estimated 8.1 million women and girls of childbearing age require help accessing reproductive health services, including antenatal care, self-delivery services, postnatal care, family planning, and emergency obstetric and newborn care. Among them are 1.3 million women who will deliver in 2022, of whom 195,000 are projected to develop complications requiring medical assistance to save their lives and that of their newborns. Also, over 1 million pregnant and breastfeeding women are projected to experience acute malnutrition sometimes in the course of 2022. Due to extreme shortages of essential medicines, supplies, and specialized staff, only 1 in 5 the functioning facilities is able to provide maternal and child health services, the report said. It also showed that 19 out of 22 governorates face severe shortages in available maternity beds. In addition, an estimated 42.4% of Yemen's population lives more than 1 hour away from the nearest fully or partially functional public hospital. The United Nations report said women and girls also suffer disproportionately from gender-based violence, poverty, and violations of basic rights. Therefore, an estimated 6.5 million women and girls will require services to prevent and address gender-based violence in 2022, it expected, adding that such services remain overstretched across Yemen and completely absent in some hard-to-reach areas. Also, the United Nations report expected that the cumulative impact of conflict and deprivation has also taken a heavy toll on the mental health of Yemenis, particularly its women and girls, stressing that an estimated 7 million people require mental health treatment and support, but only 120,000 have uninterrupted access to these services. Suffering of displaced people in Yemen doesn't seem to see an end. Nothing can alleviate their struggle but a cessation of war.
Hajat al-Abd is the main road that links Taiz to Aden. This road has been a subject of the government's disregard. However, it needs immediate maintenance, especially when a number of accidents has been recorded in it. The government indifference has made some local community people start an initiative to help fix the road. This report has more details.
The death road that is known locally as Hajat al-Abd writes daily new suffering for travelers coming to and from Taiz after the militia closed all the ports and left the citizens between death pliers in the mountains of Hajat al-Abd. Here on this road, the daily catastrophic scenes prompted the citizens to contribute to easing the burden of travel by trying to fill in the pits and remove the stones to help facilitate the movement of the traffic.
The road here is quite bumpy. Trucks can't move freely, so I help by moving rocks from the middle of the roads as to make trucks and people pass freely.
The child Mukhtar Abdel Khale and other children in the region represent a wonderful image and unique model for community work after the restoration work of this vital and important road stopped months ago. They practice daily repairing pits even at noon between the heat of the sun along the length of the road that extends from Nakil Hajat al-Abd to the watershed leading to Lahj and Tur al-Baha. He hopes that the governorate of Taiz will fulfill its promises to repair the only artery of the governorate and ease the hardship of travel that the citizens suffer from while traveling between the governorates of Taiz and Aden.
We are now at Hajat al-Abd Road. We are filling the holes here that represent a barrier to trucks and cars and put passengers at very high risk. Sometimes these holes cause accidents and put drivers and passengers in danger. We waited a lot for someone to fix it, but no one cared, so we had to do it ourselves. When we ask about the contractor responsible for fixing the road, they keep saying he's not available.
There is no room here for mistakes or risks, as death may be a foot away from you, especially with the overcrowding and increase in traffic congestion, and stumbling in the narrowness of the road spaces as traffic stops for hours or days. This is due to many reasons, including natural factors and government corruption, which makes travelers suffer the hardship of traveling without any breakthrough, despite the continuous demand for repairing the road and lifting the siege imposed on Taiz by the Houthi militia years ago.
The Famine Early Warning Network said the poor people of Yemen did not benefit from the Yemeni rial's improvement. They added the high food prices has limited the access of poor people to food in Yemen. It noted that despite recent positive political and economic developments, the local currency has not yet stabilized and continues to fluctuate. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. The United Nations Special Envoy Hans Grunberg concludes his two-day visit to the interim capital Aden. The U.S. envoy Tim Linderking urged Houthis to release the detained staff of the embassy in Sana'a immediately and with no further delay. A huge fire erupts in displaced camps in Al Khoukha district within Hodeidah and destroys more than 40 houses. This is the end of the news. For more, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Yemen Today English. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.